The night was calm on the frontier world, and Evan was used to silence. He lived alone in a small wooden cabin built near the edge of the forest. The trees outside swayed under the two pale moons, and the only sound was the hum of the wind brushing through the leaves. It was an ordinary night, or at least it should have been. Evan had been sitting by his table, fixing an old lantern, when he heard the knock. It wasn't like any knock he had ever heard before. It wasn't the sharp, clear sound of knuckles on wood. No, this was different. It was rough, scratching, almost desperate, like claws dragging against the surface of the door. At first, Evan froze. His hand tightened around the lantern, and his breath caught in his throat. Out here, visitors were rare, and strangers never came unannounced. For a moment, he wondered if it was just an animal, but something about the sound made his chest tighten with unease. Slowly, carefully, he stood and walked toward the door. When he opened it, his world changed. Standing in the cold moonlight was not a human. It was a figure both strange and beautiful, yet frightening at the same time. She had skin the color of silver, shimmering faintly as if dusted with starlight. Her eyes glowed a soft blue, piercing but weak, like fading embers. She wore torn cloth that barely clung to her thin body, and her movements were unsteady. She looked like she had been running for days. Before Evan could speak, she stumbled forward. He instinctively reached out, and she collapsed into his arms. Her skin was cold, colder than a human's, and there was a faint metallic smell on her blood, but not human blood. Her breathing was shallow, her chest rising and falling rapidly, and when she tried to speak, only broken sounds came out, words in a language he did not understand. Evan's heart pounded. Fear told him to let go, to push her away, but something deeper made him hold her tighter. She wasn't here to hurt him. She was hurt herself. Her trembling body, her weak grip on his shirt, it was the grip of someone clinging to life. He brought her inside and laid her gently on his bed. She looked small there, almost fragile, though he could sense a wildness under her surface, like an untamed creature forced into a corner. Her silver skin glistened under the dim lantern light, and he noticed deep cuts across her arms and legs, wounds that looked like they came from claws or blades. Whoever she was, she had been hunted, chased, or worse. Evan fetched water and tried to give her a drink. At first she hesitated, staring at him with those glowing eyes full of suspicion and fear. But after a moment, her lips touched the cup, and she drank greedily. He tore strips of cloth to bind her wounds, his hands shaking as he worked. She winced but didn't resist. When he was finished, she lay there staring at him, her eyes heavy but sharp. For a long while, they said nothing. Evan didn't know what to say. What could he say to an alien girl who had just collapsed into his home? Yet, in that silence, something passed between them, a fragile thread of trust. Just as he thought she might rest, something unexpected happened. Her hand shot up, weak but determined, and gripped his shoulder. He leaned closer, confused, and that's when it happened. Her teeth sank into his skin. Evan gasped in pain, nearly pulling back, but she didn't bite in anger. It was firm, deliberate, almost ritualistic. The sharp sting spread through his body, and when she finally released him, he was left with a red mark on his shoulder. Her eyes softened, and for the first time since she arrived, her body relaxed. Without a word, she curled up on his bed, pulling the blanket around herself like a wild animal claiming a den. Within minutes, she was asleep, her breathing slow and steady. Evan stood there in shock, hand pressed against the fresh bite. He didn't understand what it meant, but he knew this much: his life of silence and solitude was gone. That night, under the silver moons, an unusual alien girl had found her way into his home. She had marked him with a bite, and now, she had claimed his bed as her own. And Evan could not shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. The morning sun crept slowly through the cracks of Evan's cabin, painting soft lines of gold across the wooden floor. Evan had not slept at all. He had sat awake, staring at the girl who now lay curled up in his bed. Her silver skin glowed faintly in the dawn light, and her chest rose and fell with steady breaths. She looked peaceful, too peaceful compared to the chaos she had carried with her the night before. Evan rubbed his shoulder where she had bitten him. The mark was still fresh, a small crescent of teeth pressed into his skin. It throbbed faintly, as if reminding him of the strange bond she had forced on him. He didn't know why she had done it, but he couldn't forget the look in her eyes afterward. Not anger, not hunger, but something else, relief. As he watched her sleep, a storm of thoughts spun in his mind. Who was she? Why had she chosen his home, of all places? What did the bite mean? He had lived alone for years, choosing solitude over the noisy life of the domes. Yet in one night, an alien girl had stepped into his quiet world and turned it upside down. When she finally stirred, Evan tensed. Her eyes opened slowly, the glowing blue light, soft but alert. She scanned the room as though making sure it was real. Then her gaze fell on him, and she tilted her head like a curious animal. "You, safe," she whispered in broken words. Her voice was low, rough, as if her throat was not used to speaking his language. Evan blinked. Surprised, she knew even a little of his tongue. "Safe," he repeated cautiously. She nodded, pressing a hand to her chest, then pointing to him. "Safe, with you." Her words struck him harder than he expected. He wasn't used to being needed by anyone. For years, he had chosen isolation because it was easier. No responsibility, no bonds, no pain. Yet here she was, claiming safety in his presence like it was the most natural thing in the world. He tried to ask her name, but she only stared blankly. He gestured at himself, "Evan," then pointed at her, questioning lie. She hesitated, then murmured, "Sira." The name rolled gently from her lips, carrying a weight that seemed older than she was. Evan repeated it softly, "Sira." She blinked at him, and for the first time, he thought he saw the faintest trace of a smile. The hours passed slowly. Evan tried to keep busy preparing food, fixing tools, cleaning the cabin, but his eyes always drifted back to her. Sira followed him with quiet curiosity, watching every movement, her sharp gaze never straying far. When he brought food to her, she sniffed at first, cautious like a wild creature, then ate quickly, as though she hadn't eaten in days. But what unsettled him most was how she treated his bed. She refused to leave it. Whenever he suggested she move to the couch, she shook her head firmly and curled back under the blanket. The bed, it seemed, was not just comfort, it was her den, a place she had claimed. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Evan tried again to understand the bite. He touched his shoulder and asked softly, "Why? Why bite me?" At once, Sira's body stiffened, her glowing eyes narrowed with intensity. She reached forward and pressed her hand over the mark, her touch both firm and trembling. "Bond?" she whispered. "Safe. No, alone." Her broken words sent a shiver through him. A bond? Did she mean she had tied herself to him? That she had chosen him? Evan's heart pounded as he realized the weight of it. She hadn't just marked him out of instinct. To her, it was something sacred. Yet he was only a man, an ordinary human living on the edge of nowhere. Why him? Sira leaned closer, her voice low, almost pleading. "You mine, I yours." Evan froze. The words were simple, almost childlike, but the meaning behind them was heavy. In her world, this bond was not temporary. It was a promise, a claim of belonging. That night, as darkness wrapped the cabin once more, Evan lay awake beside the bed. He couldn't bring himself to push her away, but he also couldn't silence the questions tearing through his mind. What danger had driven her here? What hunters had carved those scars into her body? And what did it mean for him, now that she had chosen him, with a bite that still burned faintly on his skin? As he stared at the ceiling, listening to her soft breaths, Evan understood one thing with absolute certainty. His life was no longer his own. Sira had marked him, claimed his bed as her den, and drawn him into her world of fear and survival. And deep inside, he felt a strange truth rising in his chest. He couldn't turn her away, no matter what came next. The next days passed slowly, but nothing about them felt ordinary to Evan. His cabin, once a place of silence and routine, was now alive with the presence of Sira. She was unlike anyone he had ever known. Alien, yes, but also strangely human. And her needs. At first, she barely spoke. Her words were broken, her sentences short, but her eyes spoke volumes. They followed him everywhere, sharp and searching, like she was trying to memorize his every movement. She studied how he lit the fire, how he cooked, how he moved his hands when he fixed his tools. To her, everything was new, and she absorbed it like a child watching the world for the first time. Evan tried to keep distance, at least in his mind. He reminded himself she wasn't human, that whatever bond her bite had created might mean nothing to him. Yet, no matter how much he tried to think that way, he couldn't ignore the way she made him feel. When he cooked meals, she sat close, her glowing eyes reflecting the firelight, waiting eagerly for him to place food in front of her. When he walked outside to chop wood, she followed, quiet as a shadow, watching him with curiosity. She didn't speak much, but when she did, her words carried weight. "Evan," she said one morning, her voice soft but sure. She pointed at him. "Yes," he answered, nodding. "Evan." She touched her chest. "Sira." He smiled faintly. "Sira." Her lips curved into the smallest smile, but her eyes, those sharp, glowing eyes, shone with something more. It wasn't just learning names. It was connection. The bite on his shoulder still ached sometimes, a dull reminder of what she had done. Whenever his hand drifted to it, he caught her watching. She didn't apologize, didn't explain further, but her gaze was intense, almost protective, as if the mark was a promise she intended to keep. At night, she refused to leave his bed. Evan had offered her the couch, blankets near the fire, even a soft mat on the floor, but every time, she shook her head firmly and crawled back into the bed. It wasn't just comfort for her, it was territory. Her den. One evening, as rain pattered gently against the cabin roof, Evan found himself sitting at the table, staring at her, while she lay curled under the blanket. She seemed calmer now, her wounds healing, her breathing steady. But there were moments when thunder rumbled, or when shadows flickered across the window, that her body tensed and her eyes widened in fear. She was haunted by something, and no amount of safety inside his cabin could erase it. That night, she woke screaming. Evan jumped to his feet, heart racing. She sat upright in the bed, gasping, her claws digging into the blanket, eyes glowing fiercely, as if she were still fighting something unseen. He rushed to her side, unsure what to do. "Sira," he whispered softly. "It's all right. You're safe." Her gaze darted to him, wild and panicked, before softening when she recognized his face. Slowly, her breathing calmed. Trembling, she reached out and gripped his arm tightly, as though he were the only anchor keeping her from drowning in her memories. He stayed there beside her, letting her hold on to him until her fear passed. For the first time in years, Evan realized what it meant to be needed. Not casually, not politely, but desperately, like her very life depended on him. When she finally lay back down, still clutching his sleeve, he sat beside the bed until her breathing steadied again. The next morning, her voice was quiet, but steady. "Dream, bad," she said, struggling with the words. She pointed to herself, hunted, lost. Then she touched his arm gently. "But safe, with you." Evan's chest tightened. He didn't know what force had driven her to his door, but it had left scars deeper than the ones on her skin. She had lost her people, her safety, her world, and now she clung to him as if he were the last thing she had left. For a long time, Evan sat in silence, staring at the forest outside the window. He had always chosen to be alone, believing it was easier. But now, with Sarah in his bed, with her fragile trust in his hands, he wondered if solitude had only ever been a shield. The alien girl was no longer just a stranger in his home. She was becoming something more, something he hadn't allowed himself to have in years. And as much as he tried to deny it, Evan knew this truth. The bond she had forced with her bite was beginning to feel real. The nights grew colder as the moons turned, and Evan found himself sharing his quiet life with someone who did not belong to this world and, yet somehow fit into it more than he had expected. Sarah had changed the rhythm of his days. She was no longer a silent shadow in his cabin. Bit by bit, she spoke more, learned more, and revealed pieces of who she was. Still, there was something unspoken between them. The bite. Evan could not forget it. The faint crescent mark on his shoulder never faded completely. Sometimes it burned like fire. Sometimes it was nothing more than a dull ache. He had tried to push the thought away, but every time Sarah's eyes lingered on that mark, he felt the weight of it all over again. One evening, as the sun set in streaks of orange behind the forest, Evan decided he couldn't keep quiet anymore. They sat by the fire, Sarah curled up in her usual spot on his bed, her silver skin catching the light, her glowing eyes calm but alert. Evan pressed a hand against his shoulder. "Sarah," he began, his voice steady but soft. "Why did you bite me?" Her body tensed instantly. Her glowing eyes flickered with a strange mix of fear and determination. For a moment she stayed silent, her clawed fingers tightening around the blanket. Evan thought she might refuse to answer. Then, slowly, she rose from the bed and walked toward him. Her steps were quiet, but every movement was deliberate, careful, as if this moment mattered more than any before. She stopped in front of him, her gaze locked on his. "Bond?" she whispered. Her voice trembled, but the word carried power. Evan frowned slightly. "Bond? What does that mean?" She touched her chest with one hand, then reached out and placed the other on his shoulder, right over the mark. Her skin was cool, but her touch was firm. "Alone. No more," she said, piecing together his language with effort. "Bite. Mark. You safe. I safe. Together." Her words sank into him like heavy stones. He wanted to tell himself it was just instinct, just some alien habit. But the way she said it, the way her voice broke when she spoke of being alone, was clear this was no small gesture to her. Evan's throat tightened. "So, you marked me because you trust me." She shook her head slowly. "Not trust only. Claim." Her glowing eyes softened, but her voice was serious. "You mine? I yours." The cabin was silent, except for the crackling of the fire. Evan sat frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. He had never asked for this, never wanted to be bound to anyone. Yet the look in her eyes, full of both fear and hope, made it impossible to dismiss. Sarah stepped back a little, lowering her gaze, as if ashamed. "My people. Gone," she said haltingly. "Hunters take all, kill all. I run, only I live." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, Evan saw tears glimmer in her glowing eyes. No family, no den, no safe, alone, always alone. Her shoulders shook as she fought to continue. "Bite mean no, alone. Bond mean belong. I belong with you." Evan's chest ached as he listened. He could see it, now, the haunted dreams, the way she clung to his bed, the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. She was not just surviving. She was searching for something to hold on to, something to make her feel alive again. And somehow, she had chosen him. Evan swallowed hard, words failing him. He wanted to say it was too much, that he wasn't strong enough to carry someone else's hope. But when he looked at her, this strange, fragile, fierce girl standing before him, he couldn't. Instead, he reached out and gently placed a hand over hers, the one resting on his shoulder. Her eyes widened at the touch, as if she hadn't expected him to accept it. I don't understand everything, he admitted quietly, but I won't let you be alone. For the first time, Syrah's expression softened fully. Her lips curved into a trembling smile, and she whispered, "Safe. With you." That night, she curled closer than ever, her head resting lightly against his arm as she drifted into sleep. Evan lay awake, staring at the ceiling, his mind heavy with thoughts. The bond she had spoken of, it wasn't just instinct. It was survival, yes, but also something more. It was trust. It was belonging. And though he still didn't know why fate had brought her to his door, Evan understood one thing with clarity. Her bite had marked him, yes, but it had also changed him. For the first time in years, he didn't feel completely alone either. The days after Syrah's confession were quiet, almost too quiet. Evan carried on with his routines, chopping wood, cooking meals, repairing tools, but everything felt different now. Syrah was no longer just a wounded stranger in his cabin. She had given him her trust, her bond, and with every passing day, he felt the weight of it settle deeper into his chest. She followed him everywhere now, never letting him drift too far from her sight. When he worked outside, she sat near the trees, eyes alert, as though guarding the boundary of his land. When he slept, she curled close, her claws twitching whenever the wind outside grew too loud. She was healing, yes, but the fear that lived inside her had not gone, and Evan began to understand why it happened on a night when the forest was unusually still. The wind had stopped, and the usual hum of distant creatures was gone. Evan was by the fire, fixing the strap of his old rifle, while Syrah sat on the bed, watching the flames with her glowing eyes half-lidded in thought. Then came the sound, a low, distant roar, like an engine tearing through the night air. Evan froze, his hand still on the rifle. He hadn't heard that sound in years, not since the days when raiders and hunters had prowled the frontier, chasing anything they thought valuable. Syrah stiffened instantly. Her head jerked toward the window, her body tense like a bow pulled too tight. Her eyes widened with terror, and for a moment, she looked like the same broken figure who had first collapsed at his door. The engine grew louder, lights flickering through the trees. Evan's stomach dropped. Whoever they were coming straight toward the cabin. Syrah's voice cracked as she whispered, "Hunters." Evan's blood went cold. He looked at her, really looked, and saw the truth in her eyes. These were the ones who had taken everything from her. The ones who had left her running, bleeding, desperate. And now they had come here. The rumble stopped, outside, followed by heavy footsteps crunching through the dirt. Then came the voices, harsh, laughing, cruel. "Thought we saw tracks this way. She can't hide forever. Beasts worth more alive than dead." Syrah pressed herself into the corner of the cabin, her whole body trembling. She looked at Evan with wide, desperate eyes, as if begging him not to give her up, and in that moment, Evan understood. The bite, the bond, the trust, it had all been for this. She had chosen him because she believed he could keep her safe when the hunters came. He gripped his rifle, his heart pounding so hard it hurt. He wasn't a soldier, wasn't a hero, but he was human. And humans, when pushed into a corner, could be stubborn beyond reason. The hunters pounded on the cabin door. "Hand her over, human," one of them shouted. "We know what you've got inside. That creature belongs to us." Evan's jaw tightened. He glanced at Syrah, who was crouched, low claws digging into the wooden floor, fear burning in her glowing eyes. She had lost her people, her home, everything, and now she was about to lose the last safe place she had found. Not while he was still breathing. He raised his rifle and called back through the door, his voice steady. "She doesn't belong to you." The hunters laughed cruelly. "Then you'll die with her." The door shook as they rammed it, wood splintering under the force. Evan braced himself, sweat beading at his temples. His cabin, His home was about to become a battleground. Sarah crawled closer, her body trembling, but her eyes fierce now. She pressed her forehead lightly against his arm and whispered, "Together." Evan looked down at her, his heart burning, with something fierce and unshakable. Fear was there, yes, but stronger than that was resolve. She wasn't just some alien who had stumbled into his life. She was his responsibility now. His bond, his denmate. The door cracked open under another heavy blow. The hunters poured in, their weapons gleaming under the moonlight. Evan raised his rifle. The fight for their den had begun. The cabin was quiet again, but not in the way it used to be. Smoke still hung in the air. The broken door lay in pieces on the ground, and blood stained the floorboards. The hunters were gone, their bodies dragged away into the dark forest. Yet, despite the ruin, despite the scars, the cabin still stood. And so did Evan and Sarah. Evan sat by the broken table, his shoulder bandaged, his body aching from bruises and cuts. His rifle rested nearby, silent now. Across from him, Sarah sat curled on the bed she had claimed the very first night. She was weak, her silver skin marked with fresh wounds, but her glowing eyes were steady as they watched him. For a long while, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but not empty. It was the silence of survival, of two souls who had fought and bled together and had not been broken. Finally, Sarah broke the stillness. Her voice was quiet, but it carried through the ruined cabin. "They gone." Evan nodded slowly. "They won't be back." Her eyes softened, but he could see the fear still lingering there, the memory of all she had lost. She looked around, at the shattered walls, the splintered wood, the scattered ashes. Then, very slowly, her gaze returned to him. "Home?" she asked, almost uncertain, like a child testing a fragile word. Evan's chest tightened. He looked at the wreck of his cabin. Once, it had been nothing more than a shelter, a place to keep him warm through the winters, to keep him safe from storms. It had been a house, not a home. He had lived here in silence because he had chosen to be alone. But now, with her sitting there, trembling, scarred, yet alive, it felt different. "Yes," he said quietly. "Home." Her lips trembled, and for the first time, she smiled without fear. She curled tighter into the blanket, her glowing eyes shimmering with something more than survival, relief, belonging. The days that followed were slow, filled with the work of rebuilding. Evan repaired the shattered door with whatever scraps he could salvage. He cleared the bloodstains, patched the walls, and tried to make the cabin whole again. Sarah helped in her own way, fetching wood from the forest, carrying water, standing watch at the edge of the trees with sharp eyes that never seemed to tire. She was no longer just a stranger, no longer just an injured alien girl who had stumbled into his life. She was his partner now, his bond, his denmate. Sometimes, when the night grew too quiet, Evan would wake to find Sarah watching him. She didn't speak, didn't explain, just reached out and touched the mark she had left on his shoulder. It was her way of reminding him, and herself, of the bond between them. And each time, Evan covered her hand with his own, silently assuring her he would not let it break. The forest around them was still dangerous. The world beyond, still full of hunters and shadows. But inside the cabin, there was peace. Fragile, imperfect, but real. One evening, as the fire crackled low, Sarah curled against Evan, her head resting lightly on his arm. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper. "No more alone," she said. Evan felt the weight of those words, and for the first time in many years, he believed them. He wasn't alone anymore. Neither of them were. The cabin wasn't perfect. It was scarred, like them. But scars were proof of survival, proof of strength. And in its broken walls, and its small, stubborn warmth, they had found something worth fighting for. It wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was a den. It was home. And in that home, A human and an alien, two lost souls bound by a bite and a promise, had found what they both needed most. Not safety, not survival, but each other. The night air was thick with tension. Outside, the forest was unnaturally still, as if it too was holding its breath. Evan's heart pounded in his chest, every muscle tense. The hunters were here. He could hear their heavy boots crunching over the dirt and dead leaves, their voices low but sharp, calling to each other like predators circling prey. Sira crouched on the bed, her silver skin glinting faintly under the firelight. Her eyes glowed, wide and alert, her claws digging into the wooden floor. She trembled, but it was not just fear, it was anticipation, a readiness to fight. Evan's chest tightened as he realized that this tiny alien girl, fragile as she looked, was ready to face them. The cabin door burst open with a loud crash. Splinters flew like rain as three armored hunters stormed inside. Their weapons shone menacingly, blades sharp and lights glaring, their movements precise and practiced. "You can't keep her," one growled, his voice cruel. "She belongs to us." Evan's hands tightened around his rifle. "She's not yours," he shouted, his voice shaking but strong. The first hunter lunged forward, swinging a blade. Evan fired, the rifle echoing through the cabin. The shot hit its mark, and the hunter screamed, staggering back, but the other two pressed forward. The cabin, once a quiet refuge, became a chaos of splintering wood, crashing furniture, and sparks from broken tools. Sira moved like lightning. Her body was small but fierce, her claws cutting through the air, raking across a hunter's arm, drawing a cry of pain. She leaped and twisted, dodging strikes, her agility impossible for them to predict. Each time one hunter thought he had her cornered, she vanished like smoke, only to strike again. Evan fired and ducked, rolling behind the remains of a table. A hunter swung a blade, narrowly missing him, splintering wood across the floor. Sweat poured down Evan's face, and adrenaline burned in his veins. He was not a trained fighter, but he was determined. Every move, every shot, was fueled by the thought of losing her, the girl who had trusted him, bonded with him. One hunter reached for Sira, trying to grab her. She hissed, a sound like a wild animal, and tore at his armor with her claws, slashing. "Deep," he roared and swung at her, but Evan lunged from behind, hitting the hunter with all his strength. They crashed to the floor in a tangle of limbs. Sira broke free, landing nimbly on the ground. The third hunter raised a blaster, aiming at Sira. Evan dove, pushing her out of the line of fire just in time. The blast scorched the wall behind them. Heart racing, Evan grabbed a fallen Tula. Heavy Renchan swung it, with all his might, hitting the hunter in the chest. He fell back, stunned, coughing. Sarah didn't pause. She pounced, claws out, teeth bared. The final hunter struggled against her fury, but she was relentless. Evan got to his feet, rifle ready, and fired once more. The shot struck true, hitting the hunter in the shoulder. He collapsed to the floor, gasping. Silence finally fell. Heavy, suffocating silence. Smoke curled in the air. The cabin smelled of scorched wood and blood, and the broken furniture lay scattered everywhere. The hunters were gone, or at least incapacitated enough not to rise again tonight. Evan's knees shook as he sank to the floor, chest heaving. He looked at Sarah, who staggered to the bed, breathing hard, glowing eyes dim but fierce. She looked at him, then at the cabin they had both fought to defend. "Den, safe," she whispered, her voice hoarse but proud. "With you." Evan swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the battle settle into his chest. He had never imagined defending someone like this, not just from hunters, but from the world itself. And yet, he would do it again. For her. Sira collapsed on the bed, exhausted but alive. Evan sat beside her, gently covering her trembling hands with his own. They were both bruised, scarred, and bleeding. But they had survived. Together, in that ruined, smoky cabin. Evan realized something vital. This den, his cabin, once silent and empty, was no longer just a home. It was a sanctuary, a place they had fought for and would defend together. And for the first time in his life, Evan felt the fierce certainty of belonging.